Hey, I'm Charles with Rocky Mountain ATV MC. Today I'm going to show you how to install these Racetech Adventure fork springs on your Yamaha T7. Now if you already have one of these bikes, you probably already know that they come with pretty soft springs from the factory. So to fix that, you can head over to our website, click on the Racetech springs, and then on the drop down menu you can get the correct ones for your weight, and it's going to make a huge difference on how the bike rides. We're also going to be adjusting the oil height at the same time. Now, all of this stuff is pretty simple to do. Anyone can do it. Let's go ahead and get started. To get this done, we have the Racetech Adventure shock spring kit. So this is going to come with the springs. You've got some washers as well as a pipe. If the kit does not come with one of these, some kits don't, if you need to add preload, you can use some Schedule 40 PVC pipe. To start out, I'm going to loosen up the axle pinch bolts and the axle. With that stuff loosened up, now I can raise the bike off the ground, or the front wheel off the ground. So we've got our Drag Specialties scissor lift, but if you have a headstand, that's going to work great too. Now with the front wheel securely supported off the ground, we're going to go ahead and remove both brake calipers using a 12mm socket. And as you pull the front wheel out, pay attention to your spacers, don't lose them. And then from here, we're gonna undo the clips that hold these brake lines in place. On this fender, a lot of times it's just gonna be a plastic clip. You pinch the backside, but ours has zip ties on it. And then to remove the front fender, you're going to take out the 6 bolts. We're using an 8mm T-handle. Now on the left side, you're going to have the wheel speed sensor, so I'm not going to completely remove the front fender until I have that freed up. And I'm using a 4mm Allen for the fork guard. Then the wheel speed sensor cover down at the bottom. We've got this bracket holding it in place. So free it off the bracket. There's going to be one more underneath this fork guard that's kind of hard to see. Then we can remove that front fender and fork guard. And then we've got the 2 remaining Allen bolts in that other fork guard. And then ideally, you don't want to have any tension on your brake lines. So what I'm doing is using a bungee cord. I'm going over the triple clamp, the lower one, and then I'm going to hook this through each caliper to take the tension off that brake line. Now to remove the fork, I'm going to loosen the upper triple clamp pinch bolts. Then I'm going to use my calipers to measure the fork height. And I'm going to write that number down so I can put them back to the original spot when we go together. And then I'm going to use a 19mm socket to loosen the fork cap. Then loosen the lower triple clamp bolts, remove the fork tube, and do the same steps on the other side. Now over at the bench, I'm going to clean the suspension up. I've got a sink to spray things into, and then it goes down to a drain pan, but if you don't have one of these, just spray into a drain pan. And I'm just using suspension clean and a rag. Next, we're going to turn our clickers in all the way clockwise, and we're going to count the clicks. That way we can get them to the original position. And then you want to back it out. And the reason we're doing this, it's going to help us be able to bleed up the fork fluid and make sure we don't have any air in the system. We have this rubber cap. That's going to expose your clicker, and do the same steps. Now from here, you want to have some soft jaws and a vise. We've got several options on our website. We've got this one right here from Motion Pro that is specific for suspension. It's going to make it easier. You want to clamp this upper tube in there. And we already broke that cap free. That way, if you don't have a vise, you can still get this job done. I'm going to loosen it the rest of the way up. Since we have this Motion Pro vise, I'm going to pull that metal plate out, rest that lower fork tube on there, and then clamp the upper tube. Next, I'm going to use a 17mm wrench There's a little nut underneath the cap. If you have a thin 17 like this, you can fit it in between the spring. If you have a fat one, you can press the spring down, hold that nut, then break it free with that 19mm socket on top. You want to press down on the spring as you remove that fork cap. So you got the cap, you've got a collar right here. Then you're going to remove the fork spring. Now I'm going to remove the fork from the vise. Then I'm going to dump the oil out, but pay attention, you've got this damper adjusting rod in the center. You can either put your finger over it so it doesn't fall out, or remove it when you pour everything out. And for me, I'm just going to take it out, get it out of my way, and then I'm going to pump the damping rod up and down. That's going to help any remaining fork oil come out. And then if you want to get all the oil out, you can let this sit upside down for about 10 minutes. And then reinstall it back into your vise. I've laid out the stock spring next to the two Racetech springs. You can see it's quite a bit longer. So our next step is to set the preload for these Racetech springs. And I want to point out, these springs are intentionally shorter. So with that being said, what we need to do is take one of these springs, we're going to set it inside of our fork. Now I'm going to use my Motion Pro tool to pull that damping rod up. And now I'm going to install one of the washers that came in our kit. I also have that collar that came stock. And then I'm going to thread the cap all the way on until it bottoms out. So right there, it bottoms all the way out. Now we need to take a measurement from the bottom of this cap to the top of that collar. So I'm 46 millimeters. I'm gonna add 10 to that because we want this spring to be preloaded 10 millimeters. So that's how long I'm gonna cut that tube, is 56 millimeters. And just so you guys know, you always wanna have the washer in between the spring and your spacer for a buffer. That's why we put the washer on for the measurement. And the 10 millimeters we added is the amount of preload that Racetech recommends for this bike. There is a supplement that comes with these springs that recommends a 57 millimeter spacer along with the washer, but again, the preload should be 10 millimeters. So we're going with our measurement. You'll want to make sure it's accurate, so measure twice and cut once. I'm gonna take my pipe and lightly clamp it in my vise. And I'll measure out 56 millimeters and use a pipe cutter to cut that off. And then from here, I'm just gonna deburr this spacer. So you can use either files or sandpaper to do that. And then we're gonna make the same size spacer for the other fork tube. With a cut, just verify your measurement. If for some reason it's too short, the springs do come with extra washers, so you can add those to get to the correct length. All right, now that we have everything cut up, I'm gonna make sure we don't have any metal shavings on any of the parts. So I'm just gonna spray everything off with suspension cleaner. Next, we're gonna measure out 624 cc's of 5-weight fork oil. We're gonna pour that in. So I just poured in 500 milliliters, and then this is the other 124. I'm gonna have to work this damping rod up and down just a little bit to get it going down. So once you have it filled with oil, you wanna bleed the damping rod. So I'm gonna take the Motion Pro damping rod bleeder tool. We're gonna pump this up and down at least 10 times, but the main thing you wanna pay attention to is make sure you don't hear any bubbles or have any spots where this damping rod just kind of drops out. You want to make sure you pump all of that air out. Then I'm just going to let this sit for about 10 minutes. and we're gonna suck any excess oil out. Now that we've let that oil sit, we're gonna set the level. So I'm gonna use the Tusk fork oil level tool, and I'm gonna set this to 110 millimeters. And your stock height is gonna be 85 millimeters from the top. So right there, once you get some air sucking through, you've got the correct height. And that 110 millimeters, that's just for optimal bottoming resistance without being too harsh. Next, we're gonna install our rod. Now for assembly, you wanna make sure that the jam nut is backed off all the way, which it is. So now I can take this spacer, set that down. Next we have our washer, the spring, and I've got this spring collar going at the top. And I'm gonna reach down with my damping rod bleed tool. I'm gonna screw that onto the damping rod, pull it up. And while that's up, I'm gonna press down on the spring again. Use that 16 millimeter combo wrench to hold everything again. Unscrew this damping rod bleeder tool. Then we can install the cap. And it's really important when you install this cap, you should feel a positive stop. So right there, that's a solid stop, and we have a little gap between the jam nut and the cap. That's exactly what you want. If you don't see that gap, you need to go back and make sure that the jam nut is backed off all the way. But for us, we're gonna take our 17 millimeter wrench and our 19 socket and tighten the cap. And this just gets torqued to 11 foot-pounds. We'll go ahead and move both of these wrenches. Then from here, you can lower that inner fork tube. And I'm gonna apply a little bit of oil, just some fork oil to that O-ring before it's all the way on. I'm just gonna snug it down. And if you wanna torque it, it's gonna be 22 foot-pounds. And then from here, we need to reset our clickers, and then we're gonna do all of these same steps on the other fork. We were 17 on top and 10 on the bottom. And then once you have the clicker set, don't forget the cap in the bottom. And with that done, we'll move on to the other fork. Now, one thing I want to point out on this other fork, we have this plastic retainer for that wheel speed sensor. You don't want to break that. So I've got this outer tube pushed down just above that, but I still have the inner tube exposed on the top so we can do all of our settings. With our forks all buttoned up, we can slide these back into our triple clamps. And I'm just matching the height that we had them at before. After that, you want to tighten down your pinch bolts. The lower ones get torqued to 15 foot-pounds and the uppers will be 17 foot-pounds. The next step is to put the fork guards, fender, and calipers back into place. Don't forget about that wheel speed sensor. Then we can remove the bolt we had temporarily holding in the calipers. We're going to install our wheel. And then reinstall the calipers and install both bolts. The caliper bolts get torqued to 30 foot-pounds. The axle bolt will be torqued to 53 foot-pounds. I'm going to spin the tire and hold the brake. That's going to make sure everything's lined up, and then I'll torque down those pinch bolts for that axle clamp to 15 foot-pounds. So that's it for installing the Racetech Adventure fork springs on your Yamaha T7. Now we've already done the shock spring as well, and if you need either of these springs, front or rear or both, you can head over to our website, just click the link in the description below. We've made it really easy to get the correct springs for your weight, Just select the drop-down menu and you're gonna have those options right there. We also offer free shipping on orders over $75, so take advantage of that. And if you have any questions about the install process, leave those down in the comments. And if you wanna see more helpful videos like these, subscribe to our channel. I'm Charles with Rocky Mountain ATV MC. Thanks for watching.